Hello, my name is Malia Dumont. I'm Chief of Staff and Vice President for Strategy and Policy at Bard College. And I'm also an alumna of Bard, where I majored in Chinese language. And today I'm very pleased to have for a conversation President Leon Botstein and the Dean of our Conservatory of Music, Han Dun, the Oscar-winning composer. It's my great pleasure to have both of them tuning in from their various locations around the world. And I would like to start, Leon, by asking you about how this relationship with Han Dun and the conservatory started. How did it come to be that you hired Han Dun? And how do you think his artistic profile connects with the larger mission and values of the college?
Well, thank you, Malia, and thank you, Tandon, for joining us in this conversation. 15 or 16 years ago, a colleague of ours, Robert Martin, who had been Dean of Graduate Studies, was a musician and a philosopher. That means that he had been the cellist in the Sequoia Quartet, which was a very fine American quartet. And he had also done a PhD at Yale in philosophy and became a tenured professor at Rutgers. And he lived a kind of double life in the best sense. He made a career as a philosopher. He made first a career as a cellist, then he made a career as a philosopher. Then while he was in academic life, he decided to jump and become a member of this quartet. He had been in Marlborough as a cellist, very gifted, growing up in Cincinnati. And then he gone to a liberal arts college. And when he was an undergraduate, the only way he could do both music and his love of philosophy was to commute to Curtis. So he felt he had been joined two religions at the same time, kind of academic religion, and then he changed his clothes quickly and he ran to Curtis and he played the musician religion, and then he ran back. It was a schizophrenic life, and he did it. It took him, I think, maybe 5 years. It was hard, but he accomplished it. And he was the only person to do it. And we hired him after he left the quartet. He began to work at UCLA, and I hired him to become Dean of Graduate Studies, and also to join me in an enterprise that has been very successful called the Bard Music Festival. And one thing led to another, and we built a beautiful performing arts center, which is a public performing arts center. You can see it online, the Fisher Center, designed by Frank Gehry and Yasuhito Toyota, the great acoustician, the same people that built Disney Hall in LA. And on the Hudson, we had these beautiful facilities, and we had a very, very important history in teaching music. But Bob had the idea of, why do we actually, it was sort of crazy, totally crazy, why don't we build a new conservatory with a new set of ideas? Not a copy of the old conservatories, but with new ideas. And he had this idea in a moment of a lot of optimism, and can-do attitude, not in the midst of a pandemic, and I listened to the idea, and like all things in the world, if the idea is good, there's probably a way of working it. And so he knew that he was close to retirement when he had this idea, and he said it would be him a dream to come true. And someone tells you, I have this dream, and the dream is good. And so I said, I gave him the green light, and the trustees gave him the green light. Now, of course, he knew that I was sympathetic because I had a similar career path. I'd always lived a double life as a musician, and in my case, as a scholar of the history of music. So we built a conservatory based on the idea of students doing two things simultaneously well, on the theory that they would become better musicians, or if they became doctors or scientists, they'd be better doctors and scientists because of their very high level accomplishments in music. Accomplishing something in music requires not only talent. There's no such thing as inspiration. There may be something as talent. Inspiration and achievement is gotten by a mixture of emotional commitment and real hard work. And Bob, to his credit, had very high standards. So we started the conservatory 15 years ago, and we got fantastic students. A lot of them, not surprisingly, come from Asia and from China and from Japan, Korea, and not only from the United States, and from Hungary and Europe, all over the world, Venezuela. So the conservatory is immediately international. And these were fantastic students. And obviously it's small, about 140 or 150 students. And we had an orchestra. The orchestra turned out to be terrific. And we took the orchestra to China on tour, I think in 2012. And we took it to Europe and to Cuba. And it was just a wild success with wonderful undergraduates who had some of them came without any interest, a second interest, and thought maybe it's a good idea. Some had parents who said, listen, we don't really want you to become a musician. We know you're really good at what you do, playing an instrument, or maybe want to be a composer, but we'll feel better if you go to this program as opposed to just a straight music school. And it turns out that living with other students and taking other courses, these students didn't feel the way Bob did when he was undergraduate, that they were moving between two things. They were in a community, and music helped what they were doing else, and what they were doing something else helped their music. And I'm proud to say many of the alumni have done fantastically well. So Bob retired, and I was actually in China. We have a U.S.-China Music Institute, which teaches Chinese music to Western students. And we have a close relation with the Central Conservatory in Beijing. And I had been invited to conduct in China. And the head of the U.S.-China Music Institute and I, actually, Malia, you were on the tour as well. And Jindong Tsai, he made a comment, which I'll never forget. In the United States of America, the overwhelming single most important constituency of enrollment in conservatories come from Asia. They're not Americans living in the United States. They're students from abroad. And despite our president's policy, and despite the absolutely intolerable xenophobia that some people feel in all pandemics, for example, in 1918, the flu wasn't Spanish, although it was called the Spanish flu. There's nothing Spanish about it. But there really wasn't a conservatory, not Juilliard, not Curtis, not San Francisco, not Eastman, where a prominent Asian American musician is in charge of its future. And I thought about that, and I said, why not? Why? That's something about that doesn't seem right. But then when Bob retired, I said, well, let's write a list of the things we want. And I thought, we want someone who's unbelievably creative. So maybe it's just not someone, he was a cellist. Maybe the composer, who's the most important person in our musical tradition, is the composer, not the performer. The second most important is the listener. Then comes the performer. So since both are distinguished composers, George Sontakis and Joan Tower, have been at Bard a long time, and it would be great to add a composer of a different kind. Two, we want someone who has shown unbelievable range in thinking about the future of music in the world. Because music's future isn't assured in the world. It's not like medicine. It's not like physics. It's not even like economics or history. It's not something everybody will do all the time. There are many different kinds of musics, and we often make too much of what this kind of music and that kind of music is. So we need a person who links past, present, and future. Most people get stuck looking backwards. Most people get stuck just looking at their own feet. Is there someone who can look backwards at their feet and look ahead and not repeat themselves? And suddenly there was no list. But by being in China, Tan Dun's name came up. And we had several friends in common in the world of music. And this is just a lesson in life. Never stop dreaming. So I said, what can we lose? What can we lose?
You had not actually met him before, is that correct?
I think we may have met. I think we met briefly. But when you meet a very famous person, first of all, you might remember it, but the chance that they would remember it is very small. So there's always an asymmetry with people of great fame that people will say, well, I know Queen Elizabeth, but the real question is, does Queen Elizabeth know you? That's not the real question. Because the number of people the Queen meets so exceeds the number of people she could possibly remember that meeting the Queen doesn't constitute knowing. So, but I did know the person that we knew in common. That was absolutely sure. So he was very encouraging and said, just write him a letter again. And so I did. And I wasn't sure I'd ever get a reply, you know. And he did reply. And we met. And it was for me like a miracle. You know, it seemed to interest him, the project, the way we had organized it. He can more than speak for himself. And so I offered him the job, and it's one of the best things I've ever done in my life. And why? Because the music he writes is of superb quality. It engages technology, in this case, the movies, in one case. He has deep training in the history of music. We had actually invited him as a conductor of Tone, the orchestra now, which is our graduate orchestra. I'm the music director of that. And he was suggested as a guest conductor, and he's a wonderful conductor, and did a concert in New York at Lincoln Center with the orchestra, and one of his own pieces. So it was the perfect combination, a thoughtful, generous, world-famous person who is a terrific performer and a great composer. And in a way that looks forward as opposed to backwards. And a deeply generous and nice man. It was obvious, very easy to work with. So I can simply say it was one of those rare ideas where the good Lord smiled on me and gave me a train of thought that it's like finding an oasis in the desert. You know, I had no map, no compass. I just kept praying and going, and there was a beautiful green tree sprouting out of the ground in the sand. That was Tan Dun.
Tan Dun, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're at your home in Shanghai now with your family during this time. And I wanted to ask you about your part of this story. So when Leon approached you, as he just described, and you hadn't actually been expecting something like this, so what attracted you to the idea of saying yes to the offer? What interested you about leading a conservatory at a liberal arts college, and especially at Bard, where we have the double degree requirement for all students?
Actually, I enjoyed enormously listening to Leon. Actually, to meet or to have a coffee face to face in a very, very New York, Manhattan, old fashioned, a little beautiful, stinking restaurant. I just cannot believe I could face to face to meet my icon for many, many years. And he's such a strange intellectual because he digging everything so deeply. And when I was a student since in New York for many, many years, you know, I always go to his each concert of conducting American Symphony and bards and at festival. I remember actually before we actually face to face to see each other, to talk to each other, I was actually several times listening his conducting for the opera festival at the Bard. The last one I saw, he was conducting Shostakovich, the Nose. I think it was Bob Weiser, the head of the G. Shermer publication. It's a long, long time ago. It must be 15 years ago. But since then, I had a dream. I wish I could talk to this guy. I want to figure out what's kind of organic chip in his mind. How could he manage teaching, conducting, curating, and strategically organizing such a great compound of intellectual gatherings, talents, and finally we meet. And of course, the first question is, are you interested in become a Bardian? So to me, it's not just an offer, but it seems like a message from very, very high. So I immediately actually said, yes, I'm extremely interested. Although without any knowing for the condition, but just very directly, my passion told me, this is the man you should work together. This is the man inspired you for a long, long time. Actually, this is a man who has a big vision, deep love for the young people, for the future. So I said yes. So actually my assistant told me, hey, why don't you look at the contract? The offer is okay. I said, yes, yes, yes. Just say yes, please. So that's happened to me. And I still feel so honored, never regret. And to me, a liberal arts oriented college, actually, if my kids go into any school, my first choice should come up will be the liberal arts oriented institute. You know why? Because we always want to teach our kids how to be an artist as a parent or as a teacher or as a relative, also as a friend. But actually, who can say what's the best way to be an artist? What's the most economic way, not just economically, but also time-wise? I think liberal arts is the only thing can open the gate for you to be an artist. If you actually, doesn't matter how technically you're well-trained, doesn't matter how good teacher you have, and doesn't matter how rich, how wonderful school, whatever you could be with. But if there's no liberal arts could help you to open the gate of your life, of your vision, of your art. And what's the purpose to learn? Why we need to spend 20 years in your whole life just to overcome a little technical things. As a composer and a conductor, you see, for a little things, we easily can spend 5 years just to solve one bar question or problem. It's much even longer than the philosophical procedures. So liberal arts, to me, is the most important key. For me, as a composer, as a conductor, and the major times I spent in the Central Conservatory in Beijing and the Columbia University in New York, mostly is the liberal arts path, actually how that goes deeply into a certain point could inspire me to make the best art as a student. So I have been composing for 45 years. I find there are so many very, very good teachers helped me. One of them is Leon Botstein. So I said, if I could be one of them for the next generation to share with them about how I could be an artist, how I passed all those tricky doors with very interesting keys to open all of them one by one. So liberal arts actually give you very, very powerful and magical inspirations. So the Bard Conservatory actually, I feel so proud actually, is the place very much so emphasize and encourage of this. And I think it's the best place I could choose in this world actually, to be a place to work for the kids, for the future. And often now, many, many friends, maybe the people, young artists ask me to write a letter. I said, what's happening? It's all because I want to go to next, maybe graduate school or next step to find a job. And I'm knowing this and that. I said, what's your specialties? They always tell me, and very, very proudly tell me, because they know how to swim or they know how to create the portrait, they know the literature, they know the physics, and actually they know the film and they know fine arts. Then I find all of those kind of double major or triple major interested young men, and it's so inspiring to me, not just for the society, but also personally. Because I was always very happy to write recommendation letters to them for the next steps of academic training, or to find an orchestra position, or to be a first violinist or cellist or oboist in the world of any orchestras, because I feel the institution I recommend them to go, they're lucky to have them. So that's why I learned so much actually. A young man after college, when you continue to have your graduate school, or when you want to find a job, how important the double major training, how important liberal arts training, important to you. So I think Bard concentrate on the double major is the best recipe actually for today's people. The world now needs all of us actually to have at least double major, because it's such a diverse, colorful world now. It's no longer 19th century, 18th century. It's already 21st century. So wonderful. Please, let's do it.
You've just described such a wonderful passion for and belief in the liberal arts. But your work at Bard now, this is the first time you've been affiliated with an academic institution, if I understand correctly. Did you ever envision yourself in a role like this before, given your passion for liberal arts and education? Did you imagine someday being in a position like this?
Actually, I never imagined, because I have this sort of endless energy just thinking of making. But suddenly it made me thinking of maybe I should be immediately, is because I met Leon Botstein. Leon, I think he's like a godfather, like a certain kind of with certain kind of a power. He has a lot of brains and a lot of majors running in the same time in his mind. And the first thing when I met him is I thought maybe I should start thinking about pay back to the world, this wonderful musical world from the east to the west, having given me all I need to be a good artist. And I think why I could be today's Tan Dun is because they are, and will be so many people helping me. And why not I could help somebody else, and those young people need us. And I want to be one of them. So since then, I had a chance to work with 2 orchestras at the Bard campus. Wonderful, wonderful kids, young people, young men, people from all over the world. And I lead them in the Lincoln Center and in the Fisher Center. And I think it's a wonderful campus, a wonderful facility, and a world class, absolutely. Frank Gehry, you know, I feel very actually honored, because Frank Gehry's Disney Hall, I opened. Then when I come to the Bard Fisher Center, it's like a sister concert hall, but it's for students. Oh, so lucky. So we also lead the students orchestra, Bard Philharmonic Orchestra, open a new art center in China. And we will also bring students to Norway, to different places. Russia and Maestro Leon also take them to all over the place. I think students in Bard, not just having double major and a wonderful, wonderful liberal arts training, but also great opportunity. Play together, share together in Lincoln Center, in New York, in Manhattan, and in Fisher Center, and the world.
I want to, if I may, Malia, to say that I'm very grateful to Tan Dun, and he is in a long tradition. People don't remember. The past can somehow teach us. The great composer, French composer Gabriel Fauré, was the head of the Paris Conservatory. I mean, we don't remember that our finest scientists and finest musicians ran institutions. Whether it's a Nobel Prize physicist like Max Planck, or whether it's in the case of music, in the United States, William Schumann, one of the 20th century's finest composers, was head of Juilliard, head of Lincoln Center. And Peter Menon, head of Juilliard. In the 19th century, George Chadwick, who is America's leading composer, a wonderful composer, was head of the New England Conservatory of Music. So Antonin Dvorak came to America. He taught at the Prague Conservatory, but he took a job in America as head of the first national conservatory in the United States. He came all the way to become head of the conservatory. So the tradition of great composers, you know, we sometimes think, well, the people who can compose, compose, the people who can teach, teach. That's not the case. Haydn had pupils. One of them was Beethoven. Bach had many pupils, most of them his children. I mean, Fauré is one of the great examples of someone who ran an institution. In our case, we're lucky because both Tandon and I have wonderful people to work with. Frank Corliss, the director of the conservatory, who works directly with Tandon. People like yourself, Malia, who have, you know, distinguished careers in your case in public service and in the U.S. government, have come to work, and because not everybody can do everything. I mean, I do some things well, but some things I'm not suited for. Therefore, I have to get people who are as good as I am or better than I am to do them. And Tandon the same way. So Frank, yourself, our colleagues, it takes more than one person to run an institution. But at the top in the conservatory, you need artistic genius and inspiration and ideas and risk and courage. I mean, the great thing about Tandon, since he's become dean, is that there's an endless flow of ideas and opportunities to benefit students and to benefit their experience. And they adore him. They adore him, both the tone graduate students and the undergraduate conservatory students. And so he sets a spiritual and musical tone and invents ideas and projects and connects the conservatory not only to a history of music, but to a present and future.
Yeah, I think to teach students how to play music or how to create music actually is a very, very inspiring, enjoying work. When I was in the bar, I remember when in the middle of my rehearsal, Leon drifted in, looked at me. Then I immediately told him, you know, you have such a great orchestra here. And he said, I know, I know. And what I enjoyed to teach here, specifically when I was conducting, I love them to see the music. I loved them to feel the shape and the gesture first. And I always love them to think about how the sound came from, and after sounding with their own hands, and how the sound still going on life. Of course, technically we say that is a phrasing or gesture, but actually to communicate with the young people with a very, very high spiritual way to understand a sound, a melody, a rhythm or motive came from or where to go. It's very, very important because sometimes for me, I felt to learn music from just music is very, very limited. That's why I sometimes willing to know the students' background, what they are interested. Maybe some of them are interested in physics and some maybe math. And I know some very, very talented bar students, they invite me to their music recital. And afterwards he said, Mr. Tandun, can you go to my fine arts solo show? My God, I was so shocked and so proud. And every student at the Bard Conservatory always have a very, very hidden, special, talented one genius side beyond you can tell musically, obviously. So I think to share the music with the students in the Bard, actually there another thing very, very interesting. You know, to form a great organization or great a body or orchestra or artistic group, we need to have a certain kind of conditions. For example, the people come from different cultural background. The people speaks different language and singing different songs. And the people in different age and people loving different things, from a philosophy to the math, from a physics to science. And all of those actually is happening in the campus of Bard Conservatory. So I also felt each time or each day when I stayed at conservatory, it became a very interesting learning process for me towards the very, very diverse and interesting young people around.
You know, Tan Dun, when he speaks, reminds me, for those of you who are listening and know his music, that the most famous teacher of composition in the 20th century was a French woman, Nadia Boulanger. Nadia Boulanger, Tan Dun will know the name, knows many people. Philip Glass is probably the last famous American to study with her. Grażyna Bacewicz, probably the greatest woman composer of Poland, studied with her. And the first was Aaron Copland of the Americans. But Elliott Carter, the great American composer, wrote a reminiscence of studying for 3 years with Nadia Boulanger in composition. And he tells the story that when he was packing to go back home to America, Mademoiselle Boulanger gave him a present. And the present was a copy of the most famous book of French philosophy by the French philosopher Pascal, the Pensées. And that is a way of explaining to listeners Tan Dun's sense of this. What we're trying to do is not new. Mademoiselle Boulanger knew that this very gifted American composer, who went on to make a great career as a composer, what he needed was a book of philosophy, not a manual on how to transpose from different clefs, not a textbook on composition, not more technical training, but to think about life. It's a book of theology. That book is about God and about meaning in the world and the use of our reason and what the arts might mean. And so there's a long tradition of when Beethoven died, he left a huge library. He never went to school. Brahms died, a huge library. The great composers we admired, as Tandon, have thought about larger things in larger ways. And we have a tendency to train the next generation much more technocratically, if you will. And as artists, that's not right. And so you have orchestra musicians who think the right question is, don't talk to me about the meaning of the music. Do you want it faster or slower? Well, that's not the only question. There's a reason why it might be faster or slower, and that reason may not be totally musical. And why do you have flexibility in tempos in the last movement of the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven? Well, the reason is you think this music is saying something. And in order to say something the way we speak, we modulate, we don't speak like a robot. So how do you make the decision of how to do that? Well, there are musical considerations, as Sandoz, there's phrasing, there are cadences, there are periods, all kinds of things we can talk technically. But the answer is somewhere else. The answer is, why would I emphasize this word or that word? Why would I take time before I say the next word? Because I'm trying to make a point. And you, as a performer and as a composer and a conductor, Tantan is always thinking, what's the point I want to make? What do I feel? What do I want to say? He just did this thing, which maybe you can describe it, that 70 million people have seen in the midst of this crisis. And he thinks in music, because music is a human language, not a language, but it's a human means of communication. So if you're going to train musicians in the next generation, and we who are older benefit from contact with the next generation, one of the reasons I do what I do is that if you want to keep alive and keep young, you need to stay in contact with young people, because they always come up with new ideas and think about things differently. If you just surround yourself with the familiar, the well of life will dry up.
So time is in this conversation. It's such a good one. I want to try to draw to a close, because we've been talking for almost an hour already, hard to believe. But we're in a situation now in the world where the bonds of community are being tested in new ways. And we have a very special relationship at Bard with various institutions in China. And the relationship in a larger sense between the countries, the United States and China, are becoming increasingly complicated and important in the world. So Bard's place in that is what I want to ask you about. What leadership role do you see Bard and its students playing in this crucial relationship between China and the United States, especially given the kind of emphasis that we put on civic engagement as part of our curricular experience at Bard? How does a Bard education help its students navigate and lead in this increasingly complicated world?
So if I may start, because I want to speak for Bard as a whole, and then ask Tandon what his thoughts are. We have a responsibility, because we deal with art, music, science, learning. Learning knows no national borders. learning knows no patriotism, no single language, and no single tradition. For any institution in the 21st century to be responsible, integrating and having warm relations with one of the great historic cultures and civilizations and populations in the world is a moral obligation. And we have to put politicians at a distance. We're speaking about an institution that links people to people, individuals to ideas, creative invention, whether it's in science. We need to cooperate and work together on everything from disease to art. And we, especially in bad times, need to be a counterweight. We need to put our weight on the balance of cooperation and communication and resist the tendency to divide in the human enterprise of learning and making art, which is why we have the US-China Music Institute. So Bard may be a small place, not a big university like the University of California or Yale or a place like that, but it's very, very forward-looking notion of making an international network, because we have relations with institutions not only in China, but in Europe and the Middle East and around the world, especially with China, because of its cultural, historic, philosophic, religious, political, and economic importance, is an indispensable partner for us in our enterprise. And we have to show patience and consistency as the political winds ebb and flow.
Yeah. I think the country's relationship is just like people's relationship. And physically, spiritually, it always needs a lot of bridges in different time and different weather. And the college and the conservatory, of course, is the best place. The priority of our task is to make a best bridge builders spiritually or physically, culturally, politically, diplomatically, historically. And I think now we're all witness the world needs a lot of bridges. And who can build those beautiful bridges? The young people, the future bridge builders. And we are working in Bard actually for those great bridge builders in the future. And we should be always, without hesitations, work with the future and to build through them, through our students in the future, through our talents in the future, through our creations, music, achievement, and communications to the world. I think Bard is the place, always no stopping, continue to build the bridge and to have bridge builders. And the world need it. The culture need it, and the history need it. So I'm very, very confident, and no matter the world become sometimes a little complicated. Sometimes it's just a sunshine. Sometimes a little twisted, sometimes a bumping. But the college, the education, and professors, students, we're coming together for what? It's because we want to walk together for the best bridges for the spirit, for the world. So I'm very, very confident we're doing good things. The world needs us. The young people need us. The history needs us.